Hello, friends. My name is Jim Merle, and as many of you may already know, I'm not only a heart transplant recipient myself, but I've also spent years helping others to navigate life both before and after transplant. Today, I want to talk to you about a story that's been recently making headlines. That is the recent shutdown of the government and how it is affecting the Organ Procurement Transplant Network, better known as OPTN, which is operated under a contract by UNOS, or the United Network for Organ Sharing. Many of you have seen reports about how the shutdown has impacted the OPTN for the first time ever, and understandably, that's left a lot of us patients and families kind of sort of worried. So let me share with you what's really going on, what really matters, and how there is absolutely no need to panic, at least in the current moment. According to several reports, including Axios Becker's Hospital Review, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has directed UNOS to pause much of the oversight, policy, and committee-related work because of the shutdown. In other words, many of the administrative and policy level operations, things like rulemaking, committee meetings, and long-term program reviews, are kind of temporarily on hold. Over 90 UNOS employees, roughly a quarter of the staff, have been furloughed due to the lack of federal funding. And UNOS says it's owed more than $10 million in delayed reimbursements for the OPTN, work that has already been completed last year. The good news, and what matters most, however, is that the organ matching system is fully operational. Let me say that again. The organ matching system is fully operational, at least at the moment. UNOS continues to run matches, respond to critical patient safety concerns, and to keep patient services lines wide open. So yes, organs are still being recovered, matched, transported, and most importantly, transplanted. Now, let me speak from experience, not just as a recipient, but as someone who has spent years helping to educate others about this exact process. To me, this shutdown affects what I would call the back end of the transplant world. The offices, the committees, the policymakers in Washington. Those roles are very important. Yes, they are. But they're not the ones directly responsible for getting you and me on an operating table when a heart, lung, liver, kidney, or pancreas becomes available. The front end, those are the ones who do the actual work, if you will. You might even call them the grunts, although there's no disrespect in that. That has to do with the actual matching, allocation, and surgery. And that's still moving forward as it always has. So from where I stand, there's absolutely no reason to panic. None whatsoever. The life-saving work that matters most to the patients, the kind that keeps hope alive every single day, is continuing to work at 100%. Yes, if the shutdown drags on for months, it could eventually cause long-term issues with oversight, policy, and development. But for now, as a patient or someone who is waiting, your transplant journey is not being interrupted whatsoever. With that being said, I do want to take just a moment to acknowledge the people who are affected, those 90-plus UNOS employees who were furloughed, and their families who are dealing with the uncertainty, loss of income, and even some of them stalled projects, because these are people who are really passionate about their work. These are real people doing really meaningful work, and they deserve our prayers and our compassion. We should also be praying for our government leaders, that they would come together and resolve this funding issue quickly. It isn't about policies, it's about people's lives. Now, while we are on the subject of the OTPN and UNOS, I want to share with you a concern that I've had for a long time concerning the actual allocation system itself. When I received my heart transplant 12 years ago, the system was a tiered status model. Things like 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and so on. That system wasn't perfect, I'll be the first to admit that, but it did seem to provide a clear sense of urgency as well as order to the list itself. Since then, we have moved to a broader classification system, typically numbered 1 through 7, and honestly, in my mind, it's made things more difficult for some patients. It's now nearly impossible to reach the top of the list unless you are truly in a desperate condition. The newer model, while designed to prioritize the sickest patients, sometimes ends up forcing patients to be what I would call too stable on paper by relying on life-saving interventions, things like ventilators, ECMO devices, LVADs, total artificial hearts, and so on for long periods of time. Now, let me be very clear. I'm not against these life-saving technologies. They are what some would call miracles of modern medicine. The reason so many people live long enough to reach transplant But the problem comes when these devices are treated like a kind of a holding pattern, as if the mindset becomes, well, we'll just keep the patient alive on an ECMO, and 3 to 6 months later, we'll maybe get them transplanted. That approach can actually backfire. It leaves some patients on these devices for way too long, which can cause the body's muscles to weaken, making recovery after transplant far more difficult. These tools should be bridges to transplant, not barriers that simply delay them. Ideally, we want to transplant the sickest patients soon enough that they still have the strength and resilience to thrive after transplant, not wait until they're hanging on by a thread. That's how it worked in my case. Within 12 hours of my surgery, I was up walking the halls again. Not because I was better than anyone else, but because the timing was just right. That balance, it gives the best outcomes. So what should we do with this information? First, don't panic. Don't spread the fear. The transplant system is still functioning where it matters most, and that's at the patient level. Second, let your voices be heard. Reach out to your congressmen, your senators, and urge them to restore funding quickly, both to UNOS and the OTPN, so that they can return to full operations. Tell them patients' lives and their stability depend on it. Third, let's support the people involved. Whether that's by encouraging another or sharing accurate information or simply praying for those affected, these things really do matter. And finally, never, ever, ever stop advocating for improvements to the system itself so that future patients can have the best possible chance not only to receive their transplant, but to thrive in their life afterward. So here's the bottom line. The shutdown, it is serious, but it's not catastrophic. Not for men and women waiting for that life-saving call tonight. Pray for each of them that their call would come and that their lives would be completely restored as best that God sees fit. Transplants, they're still happening. Hope is still alive. And the best thing we can do right now is to stay calm, stay informed, and stay connected. Stay stronger, my friends.